Welcome back. Hey, y'all. It's so good to see you. My name is Betsy Hawes. I just wanted to welcome you back to the 2024-25 school year. First off, it's good to see you all, and I hope that this year is a fantastic school year for everyone. This is our first of 4 sessions of professional development. We're going to focus again on aligning our work of cultural proficiency, restorative practices, Charlotte Danielson's rubrics, and our social emotional standards. This year, we're leaning into our essential elements, the standards by which one develops healthy, culturally competent individual values and behaviors, and organizational policies and practices. This session will focus on reviewing some of the old content we learned last year in hopes of refreshing your memory around tools that you can use to help you co-create your learning community to set you up for success for a great school year. So here's to the 2024-25 school year. All right, we're going to ask you to start by checking in on someone around you or to check in on yourself. So, how are you feeling today? How are you coming into this space, this learning space? How are you coming into this learning right now? Take a look at your options here. We're going to ask you to choose from these 2024 Paris Olympians. If you had a chance to watch the Olympics, if you're into the Olympics, if not, that's okay. But choose one of these 2024 Olympians that represented our United States this summer and think about which one of these Olympians best represents how you're feeling right now. If you're able, if you have somebody around you, tell someone, talk to somebody, get it out. Why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? If you're not ready to learn, that's okay. I get it. Not all of us are ready to learn when we come to school. We're not ready just because we enter the school building. So if you're not ready to learn, how can you shift your mindset to be in a place where you're open and receptive to the learning that we have for you today? What do you need to be able to do that? Do you need to get up and get a drink of water? Go to the facilities? Do you need a hug? Do you need a high five? Do you need a belly rub? Maybe not. Do you need to go get a snack? Do you need to take a lap around the building, go for a walk, do a walk and talk? What do you need to be able to be open to the learning that we're asking you to do through this sort of mini lesson that we have to offer you today? So think about how you can shift your mindset if you're not ready. If you are ready, if you're feeling like Suni Lee there, or maybe you're feeling like Simone Biles and you're excited, you're ready, have at it. If you're not, if you're feeling more like Alana Mayer there, number 2, maybe you need to think about what you need to do to get ready. All right, take some time, prepare yourself. Don't jump in unless you're ready to get started. All right. As always, or as it has been for the last year, your learning leaders are Heidi Agee, who comes to us right from our SEL department. Betsy Hawes, I'm the equity coordinator from the Office of Educational Equity. And then we have Jenny Thorpe-Wasman, who leads our QComp team as the QComp coordinator. We collaborate in this work to support teachers because we are teachers and we know how challenging it can be to do this work and to learn about how to do this work better while also doing it at the same time, right? We recognize that we are asking you to not just fly the plane, right, as you build it, but we're sometimes asking you to make the parts of the plane as you build the plane, as you fly it. And so we recognize how challenging that can be. But we know that there is so much connection between our work in restorative practices and social emotional learning that Heidi spearheads, the cultural proficiency work that I've been charged with carrying forward from our time with Dr. Trudy Arriaga, and the ways that our coaching team both supports and holds us accountable to our Danielson rubrics of teaching and learning standards. So we're here as your learning leaders to help support you and to help guide you through this work today. These are the tools that Dr. Arriaga brought us to BPS in the time that she spent with the 3 cohorts of learnings in the train-the-trainer model that she facilitated. These 4 tools are what guide us as we seek to become more culturally proficient, as we seek to grow our capacity to navigate a world that is diverse and to be effective in serving the needs of a highly diverse community of learners. The barriers, or what gets in our way, the guiding principles, with culture as our predominant force. Remember, culture is how we tap into schema. It's how we grow new learning. The The continuum, which gives us language for describing both equitable and inequitable practices, policies, and individual behaviors, and ways of responding to difference. And then finally, our essential elements, the 5 behavioral standards for measuring and planning for growth towards cultural proficiency, which is sort of essentially our rubric. So we're really going to be leaning into number 4 this year, those essential elements. So we're going to ask you to buckle up, babies, because here we go. All right. So here it is again, our 5 essential elements, or our what we would consider our behavioral standards for this work. This is what we're working towards when we talk about being more culturally proficient, right? At the end of our time together last year, Heidi and I asked you in that last session, if you can recall, to choose one of these 5 essential elements that you wanted to really lean into this year, something that may be more challenging for you, perhaps. Maybe you wanted to be more intentional about conflict and teaching how to resolve conflict. Maybe you wanted to learn about how to better assess your own culture, or how to better create a classroom culture that reflects the diversity of your students' cultures. Linked to this slide are bookmarks for each of these essential elements. If you didn't get a chance to do this last year, we would ask you to click on that link that you see at the bottom that says bookmarks. And you're going to choose one of those elements, taking a moment to reflect on the prompt that's given to you. I aim to intentionally nurture my growth in this area by blank. So how do you want to nurture the growth of that area, right, for this year? What support might you need to do so? So if you haven't done this, take a moment to reflect. And even if you did do it last year, right, think about what you said. How do you want to nurture that area of growth? Right? You might even share this thinking with your QComp coach if you haven't already. Maybe you want to share this thinking with your team, with your leadership, with your principal, so that they might even support you in this area of growth this year. Okay, so how do you want to grow? What intentionality do you want to put behind it? And then who might you use, or how might you get support that you need to make growth in that area, right? Continuing our work from last year. In addition, we also asked you to create an equity action plan. So following up our work from last year, right? If you didn't participate or you didn't get a chance to do this last year, we would ask that you take some time to do so this year. Your goal in our work at the end of last year was to remove one small inequitable barrier in your learning space for students this year. That small barrier might be as simple as removing gendered language from your vocabulary, like quote unquote boys and girls. You might replace it with more inclusive language, like scholars or students, language that is inclusive of all students on the gender spectrum. We asked all teachers to complete this action plan last year as a way to set a goal for your work this year. Right? If you didn't get a chance to do that work, go ahead and click on that link. It's linked right there on the slide, Equity Action Planning. You can take a look at that document. You can share it again with your principal or with your QComp coach so that they might support you with this work. This really is about having intention for our work. This is about ensuring that we are taking actionable steps toward removing some of those barriers, toward ensuring that we are opening the doors, to use Dr. Arriaga's metaphor, for all of our learners and all of our community members in Bloomington Public Schools.
We've linked the first 7 slide decks here for you to review as needed. There are resources and tools in each session that you could use or modify to use with your students. Please continue to help students learn more about their culture and the impact it might have on their learning and on your classroom community. If you missed any of last year's professional development, we encourage you to review the work that's linked here. Much of the work included in this slideshow was done during sessions 4 and 7. Let's take a few minutes to reflect on the work that you have done with cultural proficiency and restorative practices throughout last year. Please choose one of the questions listed on the screen to share in your circle group. You've seen the circle guidelines before, but we wanted to highlight a few things for you to remember before we start. Establish an order of speaking at the beginning of the circle that includes every participant in the group. This order is then followed for the duration of the circle, and one person talks at a time. It is always okay to pass without speaking or to hold a few moments of silence before passing. A round is complete after each person has had a turn. Circles are about listening and being heard, not problem solving. Say just enough. Balance speaking with listening. And after all have spoken, you may choose to ask clarifying questions without judgment, one at a time. Now, please pause the video and circle up to reflect on the important work that you've engaged in the past year.
So, here again are our five essential elements or our behavior standards. And you might be like, what? These again? Huh? Yeah, we're going to kind of beat this dead horse, right? Because this year, as an elementary team, we're really going to focus on the singular element of managing the dynamics of difference. And really, we're using this as more of a connection point to restorative practices. So, we're really like leaning into, zooming into this particular essential element to allow us to connect further to those restorative practices. So when we think about how we're managing these diverse communities, right? So imagine, if you imagine your students, and we go back to that cultural iceberg. So if you can remember that image of the cultural iceberg, and above the surface we have sort of this shallow idea of culture, right? Those visible things we can see with, clothing and music and food and some of the more obvious aspects of culture. And then below the surface, we see some of the less visible cultural behaviors. But if you can imagine your students as these little cultural icebergs in our classrooms, and we imagine those cultural icebergs bumping into each other all year long and vibrating off of each other all year long, that's what we're experiencing in our classrooms. So it's our job to help all of those little different cultures figure out how to manage social relationships and connections in our community. And that's really what we're doing as we manage these diverse communities. We're helping them to understand each other. We're learning how to understand each other, how to understand our students, how to manage relationships. And so we're really going to fully engage with the ideas of how to both proactively create community that's collaborative and connected and reflective of our learners and their cultures. And we're also going to nurture our learning of how to be responsive when harm is done in these communities and how to resolve conflict as it arises, which is a very normal and natural occurrence in every community. And that's exactly what restorative practices is: how to be proactive in creating community, how to nurture a positive community, how to nurture positive relationships. And then when things go wrong, when those little cultural icebergs start to bump into each other, right? Iceberg right ahead, right? Because they're going to bump into each other. They're going to get into it sometimes. How do we help them to heal from those conflicts? How do we help them to understand each other? How do we help them to come to an understanding when there has been harm that's been done? So we're really going to get after this one particularly.
Our objectives for this session. Today we'll focus on answering two key questions. The first one being, why are we doing this work? The second one being, how can we make a positive difference in our classrooms and school communities? Let's start with the why. Our recent Student Culture and Climate Survey from spring of 2024 revealed that we still need to enhance student engagement and sense of belonging in our schools. This has been a persistent trend in our district over recent years. Since student engagement is crucial for learning, it's imperative that we discover and implement effective strategies to foster a more inclusive and engaging environment. The how. The solution lies in restorative practices. Building on our work from last year, we will revisit the core elements of restorative practices this fall. Our aim is to refresh your knowledge and offer practical methods for integrating these practices into your classroom as you plan for the upcoming year. So let's get started. Here are the essential questions and learning targets we'd like you to keep in mind as we continue on with this session. The essential questions are, how do we intentionally co-create a learning community with our students rather than to them or for them, keeping the social discipline window in mind? How do we intentionally build a cohesive community with a diverse population of learners? Our learning targets are the following. I accept that the more diverse our group becomes, the more we will change and grow. And I recognize that conflict is a normal part of life. Let's start with the how. The solution lies in restorative practices. Building on our work from last year, we will revisit the core elements of restorative practices this fall. Our aim is to refresh your knowledge and offer practical methods for integrating these practices into your classroom as you plan for the upcoming year. You may recall this slide and video from previous sessions. You were first introduced to restorative practices during the Back to School PD in the fall of 2022. That same year, principals, district leaders, and paraprofessionals also received an introductory lesson to restorative practices. Last year, Betsy and I conducted a 7-part series on cultural proficiency and restorative practices at all 11 elementary sites. If you're new to the district, please take a moment to watch this short introductory video. It's important to note that restorative practices have deep indigenous roots. These practices draw from ancient traditions used in cultures worldwide, including Native Americans, Africans, First Nation Canadians, and many others.
All right. So, this slide you've probably seen before. I know you've seen it before. You've probably seen it a few times before, but it's worth remembering and it's worth a reminder as we grow our capacity for this work and as we build our restorative mindsets. It's important to remember that this is not a strategy, right? It's not a new way of teaching reading. It's not a new way of teaching math. It's a way that we show up in this work. It's a way that we show up in this community. And it's important that we remember that it's about us shifting our neural pathways, right? For some of us, we're growing new dendrites here. We're growing new neural pathways, and there can be discomfort there, right? Discomfort can be a sign of growth. Okay. I'm certainly uncomfortable, right? When I go to the gym and I'm working out, it hurts. And that discomfort is absolutely a sign that I am growing, that I am growing stronger, that I am growing better, right? So we want to invite you to sit in that discomfort, in that challenge, because we are certainly experiencing that as well. You're not alone in that. And we want to remind you that cultural proficiency, growing our restorative mindsets, this is not something that we are going to check a box in. Right? We're not going to hand you a certificate or a CEU and say, you're done. So, as we embrace that, as we embrace this mindset, I want to remind you, right? This is our way of being. It's not a strategy that we're going to adopt over time. Along with that, it's important to remember in this work what a restorative mindset is, right? What are we working towards? And so it really describes how we show up in community and what we believe our role to be within that community. And so really these are the values, the concepts that underlie what we're talking about. And so if we believe that relationships and trust are at the center of that. How do we build trust, right? We build trust over time. Trust is built slowly, but it's broken pretty quickly and pretty easily. And so remembering that, right? How do we build trust? We build it slowly. We build it over time. We're responsible to and for each other. And that's true of all members within that community. We're reminded that all voices are equal, right? We're all a part of the community. Our voices are important. We're reminded that we are all a part of restoring, right, in community, and that healing is vital to restoring community. It's important that we are held accountable in community, right? That we are taking an active role in repairing harm. Okay, that we are part of that. If I hurt someone, that it's important that I step up and I take an active role in fixing that harm. It's going to take conversation. It's going to take dialogue. It's going to take problem solving. It's going to take collaboration in problem solving. And so it's important that we understand as we think about building restorative mindsets, what's being asked of me, right? What exactly is my responsibility? And so really it's about how we in this community. So are we willing to take on these responsibilities in community? And it's important that we do if we are to build the kind of community where we feel safe to learn and where kids feel safe to come and be vulnerable to do the learning that they need to do here.
Restorative practices. The fundamental hypothesis of restorative practice is that people are happier, more cooperative, and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in position of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. A teacher's impact is much greater when students feel like they are working with their teacher and that their teacher is not talking to them or for them. This helps connect us as a community of learners and also builds our students' sense of self efficacy. This leads us to the social discipline window. The social discipline window is a tool that helps people in position of authority understand how they interact with students and how that interaction can impact students and the learning environment. It is a framework for restorative practices that helps people balance control and support when communicating with others.
So, right. Remember that when we consider healthy developmental relationships and the social discipline window, we want to remember that clear boundaries and communication are at the center of those relationships. It's important to remember that if we seek to do this work with our students and not to them or for them, we must include them and communicate with them. So I like to use the analogy of a diet. I actually hate this analogy because I don't like talking about people's bodies, but I think it's effective for my understanding. I'm a person who loves analogies, and if you are too, they help me to learn. If my doctor expects me to lose weight because they think that it will increase my life expectancy and they want to put me on a diet, am I more likely to be successful in that diet if they communicate that need and expectation with me? Or am I more likely to succeed if the doctor just puts me on a diet without my knowledge? Right? So think about that. My doctor never communicates to me and says, you need to do this thing to live longer and to be healthier. How am I ever going to be successful? Right? But if my doctor sits down with me and says, this is something that you need to do for your health, for your life, for your longevity of your life, right? I'm going to be far more successful in accomplishing that goal, right? If we worked together and if we have that conversation, if we talk about the boundaries, if we talk about the expectations, if we talk about what might allow me to be successful in that diet or in that weight loss journey, then I'm far more likely to be successful. So the same is true for our students or anyone we are in relationship with. If we expect them to respect a certain boundary we set or meet a certain need, we must communicate that need or boundary clearly and its why so they can understand it. If I expect a student to stop a particular behavior, am I going to be successful in getting them to stop by communicating what's expected and working with them to shape their behavior, by helping them understand their impact and why it might need to change? Or am I going to be successful by just telling them to stop it and then punishing the unhelpful behavior? So just think about that, right? Reflect for a minute. Again, how can we do this work with our students? And I'm talking about not just setting expectations and setting boundaries, but what about consequences, right? What about revisiting those boundaries and expectations? What about accountability, right? So, thinking about how we can include students and even holding them accountable, right? What should my response to your behavior be as a result of the actions that you've made or as a result of your choices? Okay, so thinking about, again, how can we use this notion of the social discipline window when we're thinking about doing this work with our students?
Here's a resource that requires very little teacher prep, but provides you and your class with very big rewards. It's a simple Y chart. Sitting in a circle together, ask your students to help you answer the following questions. When we are our best selves, what does it look like, sound like, and feel like? Remember, teachers, you are part of the classroom community, so please share your responses with the class as well. You could create a Y chart to establish your classroom expectations in different subjects, in different settings, and in different situations throughout the day or throughout the school year. All right, now it's your turn. Turn to your PLC or team members and discuss the following questions. When we are at our best, what does it look like, sound like, and feel like? Do our students perceive us as being safe, accountable, helpful, kind, and welcoming? And what connections are you making to the social discipline window? Next, challenge yourself to consider how you could use these insights as tools for reflection, feedback, noticing growth, and better understanding of our classroom community.
So, these are some examples of Y charts that were used to co create expectations and also just to sort of flesh out what classroom culture should look like, sound like, and feel like. This really supports students' clarity in understanding what is expected of them and showing up in the classroom. So, really clear, right? Clear is kind, helping students to really understand what should I look like? What should I sound like? What should it feel like if I show up as my best self? It also allows the classroom facilitator or even other students in the space to use this as a place to come back to for reflective questioning, for feedback, right? And that's actually where the accountability lives. So we said that when we are our best selves, the classroom would look like this. Does the classroom look like this? You said you would sound like this. Do you sound like this? Is that behavior helpful to our community of learners right now? Right. So rather than just putting up a poster on the wall, right, at the beginning of the year where I said, oh, we had everybody sign, we said this is what our classroom should look like, sound like, and feel like, I'm using these posters interactively, right, throughout the year to draw attention to give feedback, to say, hey, when we said we would show up like this, I'm noticing so and so is showing up like this, right? Are you showing up like this? I'm helping students to reflect on their behavior, right? So that they're checking themselves, right? Am I showing up like this? Do I look? Do I sound? Do I feel like this right now? Do my classmates look and sound and feel like that? So, again, not only as the classroom facilitator can I provide that feedback, can I ask those reflective questions of my learners, but they can ask each other. I don't have to be the only one who's providing that feedback or that accountability. They can ask each other. So it's not the teacher saying, you are supposed to be this way, or you are supposed to show up this way, or you said you would be this way, but it's the teacher, the facilitator, reminding the students, you said you were going to do this. And are you doing that, right? I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to remind you that this is the commitment that you made when you said you wanted to show up as your best self. So how might we use these Y charts to really bring that self-awareness and grow that self-awareness in our learners using reflective questioning and providing that specific and timely feedback for our learners? All right. As we begin to wrap up our time together, we would ask that you continue the conversation with your team, with your PLC, perhaps even throughout the year, right? This might be a question that you continue to come back to throughout the year, either with your team, with your school, with your PLC throughout the year. But take a moment and just kind of share with your team right now if you have a chance. There's a few questions here that you might respond to. You might pick one and share, but connection to the social discipline window, how do we intentionally co-create a learning community with our students rather than to them or for them? How do we intentionally build a cohesive community with a diverse population of learners? And then where can my learners have agency, voice, shared power, presence, and control in our learning community, and even perceived control, right? So, where are we allowing our students to have some voice, have some choice in the classroom? How do they show up? How are their cultures, their lives, their passions, their joys, their identities represented in the classroom? And so when we think about intentionality behind these things, right, what are some of the activities that you've already participated in, that you've had planned for the first few days of school, for the first few weeks of school, where you're allowing students to get to know each other, where you're getting to know your students, where you're giving students an opportunity to connect with each other, to have fun together, to learn about each other so that they can find who their people are within your classroom community. And so then thinking about where are these times where you're establishing the expectations, establishing agreements and boundaries for your students so that they really have clarity around how your classroom might work most efficiently and effectively. So take some time to share with your team, and you might even think about using this as your first share out, right, for your PLC as you get into PLCs this year.
Hi, everyone. Cassie May from QComp here. And I just want to tie all of this work to our work with Charlotte Danielson and specifically our Domain 1. So, when we're looking at planning and preparation, we need to respect our students' identities, understand their current knowledge and skills, have the knowledge of whole child development, and also have the knowledge of the learning process and learning differences. So when we're tying this all together, it just makes sense. It's our job to proactively get to know our students' cultures, who they are, the diversity they bring to our learning communities. And we want to think to ourselves and act on it. What can we do intentionally to make sure that we're getting to know our students to this level? And how can we leverage it in their learning this year?
All right. As you think about your students and as you continue to get to know your students, as you work to plan and prepare for your students, remember these tools, right? These are tools that we used last year as we talked about culture specifically. And as we thought about those cultural behaviors that show up in our classroom, we talked a little bit about being able to VAB, if you remember, right? Validate, affirm, build, and bridge. And we picked out these 8 cultural behaviors that show up oftentimes in our classrooms. And these are tools that will help us better understand our students' cultures and needs so that we can work to validate and affirm what's good while building and bridging to what might need to improve for their academic success. So, for example, if a student has excellent verbal communication skills, right? If they are a talker like me, right, and they can talk to anybody, they need talking time. So, how might I provide that? Right? How might I give them time to verbally process their thinking, right? Set them up for success that way rather than punish them for talking all the time out of turn, right? So, how can I give them that opportunity while also helping them to build the skill of listening to others? Because that's just as important. So, I want to validate their verbal communication gifts while also providing some timely, helpful feedback for their need to listen to others. And so, really, again, being intentional about what are the gifts, right? What are some of those cultural behaviors that my students need validation for? And then what are their areas of growth? But use these tools as you get to know your students. Don't forget about those. They were in your cultural proficiency folder that we built last year in our work together. But how might you use these tools to really better understand your students' needs and where they come from and what their cultures are? Lastly, we want you to think about how you incorporate, again, student voice, agency, choice in establishing your community, your expectations, your boundaries. Where do your students show up in your rules, in your expectations, in your physical classroom space? How are they represented in the space? We want you to share with your team, or like I said, save it for your first PLC meeting. What do you do to get to know your students, their culture, their lives, their social emotional needs, their academic needs? So if you can, here's your quick mini assignment. Share in PLCs or with your grade level team. What's one way you work to intentionally build community or co-create community expectations or boundaries in your learning space with your learners? Again, connecting back to that social discipline window. Lastly, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We value it so much, and we're just so thankful to have this time with you. We look forward to spending a little bit more time with you throughout the year, and we wish you nothing but the best for this 2024-25 school year. Have a great one, and we'll see you around Bloomington. Thanks again. I'm going to play you a clip from the famous movie Jurassic Park from 1993, and then I'll explain to you why I'm playing this clip. Take a look, and I want you to think about your students as you watch.
That's why we have to feed them like this. She had them all attacking the fences when the feeders came. The fences are electrified, though, right?
That's right, but they never attacked the same place twice. They were testing the fences for weaknesses systematically. They remember.
So the game warden is explaining how the velociraptors, which are kept in these fences, the electrified fences, are testing the fences for weaknesses. They're researching the fences to find weaknesses to get out, right? When I was a peer coach, one of my peer coach besties, Tim Suzuki, shout out Tim, taught me the term aggressive researcher. And he was talking about our students, right? He was validating their desire to test our boundaries, right? And he was reminding me that it's a student's job to test our boundaries, right? Or to test these fences as the velociraptors do. And so this scene reminds me of our students, right? As our students come to school, it's our job to test our boundaries, to find our weaknesses, right? Or to aggressively research us, right? To figure that out. What are our boundaries? What are we going to say no to? What are we going to say yes to? What are we eventually going to say yes to if they push hard enough or if they push long enough, right? So just like those velociraptors, they're testing our fences for weaknesses. So the question is, how can we do our best to intentionally make the expectations clear? And how can we be collaborative in doing so those expectations are clear? And then how can we provide as much consistency as possible so that students trust us and they know that our fences are going to stay consistent, right? That our boundaries are going to stay consistent, because those boundaries, when they're consistent, begin to support that trust, and students can feel safe to learn with us each and every day. We can leverage that trust for learning. So think about your aggressive researchers. Think about how you can make those expectations clear, and think about how you can keep those boundaries consistent. Thanks, y'all. Have a great year.